Welcome to another episode of SNAP-Ed LGU Mentor in Your Pocket. I'm your host for today, Jennifer McCaffrey from the University of Illinois, and I'm very excited about today's episode. We have heard a lot recently about N PEARS, the new system that is about to be released later this year for submission of the annual plans and annual narrative. So on today's episode, we will be talking with Lisa Ross from Kansas State University SNAP-Ed, who had the opportunity to be one of the pilot states for N PEARS. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, so I think most people are aware by now that N PEARS is the system where we will be entering our SNAP-Ed plans. So Lisa, to get us started, why don't you tell us about your overall impression of the system? Was it easy to use?
Yeah, for the most part, it was very intuitive. We didn't have training on each of the modules as part of the pilot. The pilot was set up for us to navigate our way through the process and provide feedback. And I didn't have any trouble navigating that system. There was an occasional bug here or there, but you expect that with a pilot. And I felt the workflow made sense, and going through each module was really easy to navigate. Although it was easy to navigate, each module takes a couple of hours to get through. And as pilot states, we didn't have access to some of the long-term features like uploading budgets via Excel, which would have made some of the pieces easier to use.
Yeah, so each module, a couple hours, will need to be prepared for that. So one of the things that we've heard is that the state agency is the one to take the lead on the annual plan and the narrative. So did your state agency grant you access to the system?
Yes, our state agency requested that our implementing agency have access to the needs assessment and the SNAP-Ed action plan modules. These are two modules for the state agency only, and those modules need to be completed before the implementing agency has access to their 4 modules. So I did have access to the whole system.
Okay, but so maybe for most of us, we might only have access to those 4 then. So the plan projects, the evaluation, coordination, collaboration, and plan staffing and budget. So, which are still pretty lengthy modules.
Yes.
So that's on the plan side. Did you have a chance to use both parts of the system, the annual plan and the annual narrative?
We only had a chance to do the annual plan. There are narrative pieces within the annual plan, but overall, we just had the chance to do the annual plan.
Okay, so the end portion, the one we do at the end of the year, that'll be a mystery to all of us.
Yes.
So as you went through it, what do you think are some of the benefits of the system?
Well, there were a lot of drop-down boxes and pre-populated options that you can just click on, which I found really helpful, and it cuts down on the writing narrative. One example of those drop-downs or pre-populated is within the coordination and collaboration section. All the F&S nutrition programs are already listed, and you just click on the organization you are going to coordinate with or collaborate with, and it provides several options of the purpose of your collaboration, such as PSE change effort, you're going to do social marketing with them, or they helped you with the needs assessment. And of course, there's another category with a text box that you can explain what that is. And then there was also drop-down boxes for the SNAP-Ed toolkit interventions, so you don't have to explain those. You just pick one, and then you only have to describe something if you're going to make an adaptation to it.
That's good. That sounds like it might speed things up a little bit. Yeah, very helpful. So from your view then, what might be the most challenging aspects about the new system?
What we found to be the most challenging part was the review process. It was a little clunky. The state agency can only see the implementing agency information if it is submitted to them. So you've got to get through the whole thing and then submit to the state agency. And then the state agency must review each module. They can't see the plan as a whole. The state agency can request changes, but we found you have to describe what needs to be changed. And it's not shown alongside the plan as a thread like you might see in a Word document as changes, track changes. You get individual emails for each change needing to be made. And sometimes you don't know where to make that change if there's no description. And it really wasn't the best communication system. And then you need to go through all the modules again to resubmit back to the state agency, even if there wasn't a change.
Okay, yeah, so that does sound a little cumbersome. So maybe hopefully they'll take your feedback on that, and we'll make some changes on that review process. That might be good. So we can keep our fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. So tell us, how many implementing agencies are in Kansas?
Just one, Kansas State University Research and Extension.
Okay, so do you think N PEARS would be different for those who are part of states where there are multiple implementing agencies?
A little, maybe. Coming from a state that only has one implementing agency, it's hard to say. In Kansas, we have always been the lead on the state plan, from the needs assessment all the way through the budget. So we've kind of done the whole thing. I feel states with multiple implementing agencies might not have much flexibility in allowing implementing agencies to have access to those state agency modules like the needs assessment and the action plan. It would be too many cooks in the kitchen, I think. Also, I can see that the budget by project looking different for state agencies with multiple implementing agencies. In Kansas, we're still trying to figure out the definition of a project. So I really can't imagine what that looks like for the state with multiple implementing agencies who then have multiple projects. And no matter if you have one implementing agency or multiple implementing agencies, I think it's going to come down to good communication with the state agency on how they want everything to work.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be what we're finding out too. It's really, opening up that line of communication with their state agency and really going at it together to figure it all out. So. Yes. Well, for those of us that are just waiting in anticipation, what advice do you have?
Take a deep breath. I think we're all feeling a bit overwhelmed with all the change, but just remember, you aren't going in this alone, and you don't have to be afraid to ask for help. Reach out to other land-grant university SNAP-Ed colleagues. Take advantage of any trainings that are offered. Ask your regional office for technical assistance, and definitely communicate with your state agency, because we're all learning this together as we go. So give yourself grace, be kind to yourself, and it will all work out.
Well, that's really, really good advice. And Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We know things may change related to N PEARS, but we really appreciate your firsthand experience as a pilot state, because we're all so curious. So thanks everybody for listening. We look forward to seeing you next time on the SNAP-Ed LGU Mentor in Your Pocket. You can find the podcast on Spotify and on the e-extension SNAP-Ed Resource Center at snap-edresources.extension.org. Thanks again. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved, are not a legal or expert interpretation by an endorsement of and do not necessarily represent those of South Dakota State University, the South Dakota Board of Regents, E-Extension, a SNAP-Ed state agency, the Food and Nutrition Service, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or the United States Department of Agriculture and their employees and agents. The SNAP-Ed Land-Grant University Program Development Team, SCSU, and the above-named parties, employees, and agents are not responsible for and do not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the podcast series available for listening. The primary purpose of this podcast series is to educate and inform. This podcast series does not constitute professional advice or services. The developers of SNAP-Ed LGU Mentor in Your Pocket and the above-named parties assume no liability for any activities in connection with this podcast or for use of this podcast in connection with any other website, computer, playing device, or use of any information contained in the podcast. This podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. You may not copy, edit, modify, or redistribute. This podcast is intellectual property of South Dakota State University and cannot be used without permission. To inquire about permissions for using this content, reach out to LGU PDT at lgusnaped@gmail.com.